Good morning, Commodores. This is Ed Dunn coming to you live again from my office. I'm going to hopefully do a relatively, let me move this mic, it's making noise and then that'll be bad. Hopefully do a relatively quick rundown of the Theatrical PowerPoint for you guys. Theatrical audio and video. Let me get this set up here so I can see what's going on. Okay. We did this yesterday, but again, I know we got some people out. Maybe you want to review, whatever. There's Mario. Fantastic. Okay, so let's jump right in. We'll wait for the groovy. What is sound? We talked about sound being vibrations. So when you're speaking, when I'm speaking right now, my vocal cords are vibrating. They're going into this little microphone, which has a membrane that vibrates and turns that into electricity, which then goes to your computer through the internet, and then is eventually turned back into vibrations that will come out your speaker. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Your brain is really good at dividing these into different little categories, like speech. So you're hearing me talk. That's important-ish. You can hear music, you can hear stuff that's dangerous, like your brain can perceive that, and then just filter out all the background stuff, like the Mario music that we just heard. This is a basic example of a sound system. So at its very core, a sound system is going to have some sort of input, some sort of processing. Usually that's a kind of a mixer that'll take many inputs and then adjust their levels and do different things to them, which we'll talk about later. Coming out of the mixer, you'll have a line level output, which is still a pretty low signal, but it's more strong than what comes out of the back of a microphone. And then you have speaker level output that's driven by the amplifier. The amplifiers will power it enough to go to move that cone against the magnet in the speaker. So the voltage is a lot higher in the speaker. But notice that it says input transducers and output transducers. A transducer is any device that will convert either mechanical energy into electrical energy or vice versa, the electrical energy back into the mechanical. So you've got microphones, which are input transducers, taking that mechanical audio, turning it into electricity, and then your loudspeaker does the opposite. And in fact, microphones will work as really bad speakers, and speakers can be used as really bad microphones. So let's talk a little bit about signal levels. The lowest signal levels come from mics and instruments. Again, you've got a microphone and an instrument that will take that mechanical energy and convert it into an actual electrical signal. But you can see on the chart on the right, we're talking very minor voltages until you get into the mixer. And then from the mixer, the output is line level. So you got instrument mic level going to the mixer, very low, but then the mixer bumps that up to line level. And you can see there's a difference between consumer and pro. Pro is a lot higher, a little bit more stable signal coming out of there. And then post amplifier, you'll have your speaker level, which can exceed 50 to 100 volts. So your pro line level is about 1.228 volts over there, and then speakers can be at least 50 to 100. So big jump. But know the signal levels. Our sound system's made up of several components. Our mixer is a GLD Allen and Heath GLD 80, and that connects it to the audio rack there in the middle where it says AIR2412. That is a stage box, and it connects with an Ethernet cable so that we don't have to have the mixer have all the inputs and outputs in it. That AIR2412 just means that it has 24 inputs, 12 outputs. And then below that is the patch bay. Now, everywhere you can plug in an instrument, a microphone in this building, all the mic inputs terminate in that patch bay so that you can easily say, like, oh, we need mics over here. We'll just find it in the patch bay and plug it into the back of the mixer. From there, goes into the mixer, comes back out of the mixer into the 12 part of the AIR2412, and then that connects to the amplifiers. We see the line output, orange line there. And then above where the amps are is a patch bay for the amp output. So the output of the amp connects to the various speaker outputs in the building, and then can go to our main speakers or other speakers that we set up as needed. There are also two AR84s, which is a smaller version of the AR2412, and you may have guessed it already. It has 8 inputs and 4 outputs, and those are located on stage right and stage left. So this is a quick tour of the audio rack. Up at the top is the 2412, the main hub of the GLD. Down here is where the patch ports are, and every single patch port is represented in the building right here. So it's all the other ends. So we just plug that into the mixer, and then we can connect them. Amplifiers have input ports in this rack too. They're in the bottom. And then the output side of the amplifiers here, because the amplifier takes in line level signal, output speaker level. And then there's the wall plate speaker ports. So from the outputs of the amplifiers, we patch it into the speakers. That's the patch bay. So when you're patching an input, you're going to locate down at the bottom of that little picture there. There is a picture of a typical wall port, and they'll have a number on it. So you find the microphone number, you go up to the patch bay, find where it says WP and the number. So in that, I think it's like 29. I can't read it. So you'd find wall plate 29, and then you'd find an open port on the mixer on the GLD AR2412. And then just plug it into there. The thing that tricks people up is like you may be using mic input 28, wall plate 28, but then you're plugging it into the mixer at 12. So that's like a different thing altogether. You just have to be aware that the numbers are going to potentially shift from wall plate over to the mixer, and just remember which one's which. When you get to the mixer and we start training on the mixer, you can relabel it however you want. Patching the output's almost identical. You're going to identify where you want it to go. In that picture up there, it's 23 and 24. So we'd go to the rack, find where 23 or 24 is labeled, figure out which amp we're using as our output, and then plug it in. It's super easy. All right, let's talk about mics. There's 2 different types of mics that we use. The dynamic and the condenser. Dynamic, I don't have a dynamic nearby. Anyways, we'll should look at pictures of those later. Dynamics are typically used for vocals. Sometimes they're used for close miking instruments. But you can see, just looking at the comparison there, they are more durable. Dynamics can survive bumps and bruises because there's not a whole lot in them. If you look at the picture there, it's a big magnet and then a coil attached to a diaphragm. And that diaphragm's pretty tough and can take a little bit of abuse. But because it's tough and it takes the abuse, they're less sensitive. So you have to be very close, very proximate to the microphone in order for it to work. The good side of that is it's going to filter out. If you have a lot of noise around you and you're in a noisy environment, you can kind of isolate that with the dynamic. They also don't require power. They just work because when you take a coil of wire and you move it around a magnet, that generates an electric field. So if you go talk to Dr. Schleith, he'll be like, yeah, man, that's electromagnetism. But we can use that because the vibrations move that diaphragm up and down, and because the voltage is going to oscillate with that diaphragm, that can be converted into an audio signal. The condenser is pretty much the opposite in a lot of ways. It is less durable. It's a little more fragile. If you drop a condenser, it's going to probably break. But it is more sensitive. So I'm speaking into a condenser mic right now. This is a little Zoom thing, Tascam thing. And it has some really nice condensers, so I don't have to get right up on it. And in fact, if I did, it would probably clip. That probably sounds bad. So they're good at miking. If you had like a whole room of people that you wanted to mic up, or a choir or something like that, they're really good at that. Instruments, they're good at that. Because they're more sensitive, you have to be careful using them in live situations because they can feed back, which we'll talk about feedback. They also require external power. Because it actually makes it into a little capacitor, which is another physics type thing, electrical engineering kind of thing. But essentially you have 2 thin pieces of metal. One's a diaphragm that vibrates just like it does in the dynamic microphone. That's what picks up the sound. But then there's a back plate, another piece of metal, and you basically run a current of electricity through that ordeal. And as those plates get closer and further apart, it changes that electric field. So again, voltage is varying and it's making a signal by varying that electric field. But again, you require external power. In this case, it's called phantom power. So on the board, there'll be a place to enable phantom power. So if you ever have a condenser mic that's not working, first thing to check always is phantom power turned on, because the mic won't work otherwise. Now, those are the two types of microphones. Polar patterns are how the microphones pick up. An omnidirectional mic will pick up all around it. So I wish I should have brought a mic over here. Oh well. So let's say this is a mic. This actually isn't a mic. It's a little thing you screw into the bottom of the Zoom to put in a mic stand. But let's say this is the top of the mic. In the Omni, it will pick up from the top, from the bottom, from the side, left, right, up, down, wherever. If you look over, skip subcardioid, look at cardioid. It looks kind of like an upside down heart. That mic is going to pick up primarily from the top, but as you go to the side of it, it tends to be reduced. And then the bottom is almost negligible. There's almost nothing coming. So if I were to talk into the back of a cardioid mic, it wouldn't pick me up. But if this was an Omni, it would. Supercardioid, hypercardioid, and subcardioids are all kind of variations on the theme. You can see the super and the hyper kind of pick up a little bit from the back, but will reject anything from the sides. The bidirectional mic's a cool one, because instead of picking up from the top, it typically picks up from one side or the other. They are also called figure eight mics because the pattern kind of looks like a figure eight. They're cool because you can have multiple musicians kind of standing around it on either side of it, and it picks them up really well. And then the last one there is the shotgun mic, just because it looks like a shotgun, kind of like a balloon animal shotgun. That is a very sensitive mic that's going to pick up a very narrow field. So if this was a shotgun mic and I was kind of holding it towards the camera, it would pick up the camera, but it's not going to pick up on either side of that. You see these a lot in film, TV applications because they want to isolate the sound of the actor from the rest of the scene. So that's what you would typically see a shotgun mic for. And these can be anything. You can have a subcardioid condenser or a dynamic, shotgun condenser dynamic. There are some that are typically more frequently, like for example, shotguns are usually, you're going to find them as a condenser. Bidirectionals, usually going to be a condenser, but you can get it in any type. It doesn't matter in that sense. There are two types of mixers that you need to be aware of. There's an analog, which is an older style mixer. They're still around. You'll still encounter them. And then the digital is the more modern, more commonplace these days. And the essential difference is that the analog mixer has wires for everything. It's all connected. The signal is going through its own individual hardware. Nothing is digitized. And then the digital mixer, because it's digital, it takes the audio in, converts it to a digital signal, which can then be sent over like an Ethernet cable. So how you listen to your music on the TikTok is essentially the same thing. Like it's digital audio going through that. It combines it into there. So the downside of that is originally it used to be digital audio was not very good because it is digitized. It wasn't representative of the actual sound. It's a digital analogy, I guess you could say, of what it is. In recent times, that's less of an issue because most mixers operate with 48K sample rates, which makes it sound better than CD quality audio, but the older ones typically had issues with that and the processing and stuff like that. The long and short of it is you got to just think of a digital mixer as basically a computer with a ton of audio inputs and a ton of audio outputs. It allows you to layer in cool effects like compressors and EQ and different things on each channel, which on the analog mixer you were limited by how much you could actually fit on the board because a compressor would take up a specific amount of space on the board, whereas the digital console does that in the computer. It does it in software. So it's kind of software versus hardware. Your signal processing, which you see down there, like EQ, reverb, delay, all these different effects that you can add to a sound or to a signal coming in. Again, with the analog, you'd have to add gear. Like you'd have to have a box hooked up to your mixer that would do reverb or delay or a compressor. And the digital ones, typically that's inside the computer. It's inside the mixer, so you don't have to deal with that as much. Amplifiers, basic, simple. So you got your mixer, you go to your amplifier, it takes the signal from the mixer, it amplifies it, and then it can drive speakers. You'll see ratings on your amps, like wattages. You want to try and match that. Speakers and amps will have documentation with them that tells you what you can theoretically drive with them, and that's important to make note of. Various types of speakers, and this is kind of where we stopped yesterday. Actually, we got to the next one. There's three-ish kinds of speakers that you're going to encounter in your life. We'll start with the subwoofer. Subwoofer's going to have a big cone. It typically reproduces low-frequency sounds, usually from around 150 hertz down. Humans can hear about to 20 hertz. That's where you start feeling it rather than actually hearing it. So subwoofers can resonate in those frequencies and generate that low end. Woofers are kind of your workhorse speakers. You're going to have like mid-range woofers, slightly mid to low woofers, but they're going to have a wide range of frequencies they can reproduce. So most of them can do pretty far down into the subwoofer territory and pretty high up towards the next speaker, which is the tweeter, or you see more in like professional audio, you're going to see compression driver horns. And they look just like a horn. I don't have a good picture of one right here, but it looks like it's got, like a little cone made out of plastic that directs the frequencies out of that. And that's the tweeters, you see in your speakers, they're the little tiny speakers that are up on the top. They're going to do your high frequency stuff. Sometimes it depends on the tweeter compression drivers, but usually around 2000 hertz on up. And yeah, they're just better designed for those frequencies. So that's why we have different types of speakers to do that. Sound system design. So you got all these speakers, you hang them up. You typically in auditoriums, you're going to find that there'll be a main set of speakers that kind of wash the whole thing. And you can see in that diagram down there, you've got one big speaker up in the top right, and that kind of hits and blasts the majority of the audience. But there's a balcony, and there's seating under the balcony that we have to consider. So you add fill speakers that kind of fill in those gaps. If you look very closely on the edge of the stage, there is actually a front fill because the main speakers don't hit those first couple of rows. And that's actually the case in our theater. I'm looking into getting some fill speakers to mess around with. You can hang speakers in a couple different ways. A very common way is a cluster, which is that first one you see on the kind of on the left side there, where there's three speakers and they all kind of fan out. That allows you to have sound from the middle, kind of going out and hitting all the corners. Another set that you'll see is the line array, which is the one on the right. You got the big box on top, and that is, I think I can draw on this. Let's see. Oh, wait, there it is. Pen. Cool. So this up here is actually your subwoofer. And then this is the line array. So each one of these little boxes is pointed at a different angle, like that. So if this was a line array up here, you'd have one kind of hitting here, one kind of hitting here. The subwoofer kind of goes everywhere. And then as the line array kind of bends down, it hits more of these. So line arrays kind of solve the problem of having the fill speakers. And there's a lot of thought on that. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It just depends on the hall and how it's set up. The last one we're going to talk about is the monitor speakers, and you typically see these on stage, and then they point at the musicians or the performers or whoever so that they can hear what's going on. It's sometimes called fold back or wedges because it looks like a little wedge. So those are different sound system designs you'll see. Audio frequencies are essentially what sounds low and what sounds high. This is about the range of human hearing. So you get down to about 20. You Zoomers can probably hear up to 20, but some old guy like me may be rolling off around here now, because as you get older, the hearing starts to degrade. But yeah, so your bass is in the 20 to 100. You get upper bass, and then your mid-range, upper mid-range, high-end. And again, it's 20 hertz on up to about 20,000 hertz is what we typically hear. This gives you an idea of what that all sounds like. So if you have a piano, you can attribute these frequencies directly to the piano. So C4 is middle C on the piano. So if you go up to piano and hit that C key in the middle, that's about where that is. and you can see it kind of lines up to about 261 hertz, and then you can go on all the way up here. Down at the bottom of this, it gives you an idea of like where to roll off frequencies. Stuff below 30 to 80 kind of is just noisy. It can make stuff sound muddy. And it gives you different tips like that. These are all good things to kind of experiment with. And when we do our virtual sound check stuff, I'll let you guys kind of play around with what you can do with cutting and boosting. When we cut a frequency, we're turning it down, and when we're boosting it, we're turning it up. So you can see, like, yeah, here's this bass boom. You can do different things there, muddy in the middle or boxy in those middle frequencies. So mixers have a way to handle the EQ, the equalization of the frequencies. Some on the analog mixers, you typically had a parametric EQ, which would give you like 3 or 4 different little options for kind of boosting or cutting frequencies in there. You could add outboard gear, which would be like a graphic EQ, which can do, you know, a little bit more refined equalization on tighter frequencies. And then you can add effects processors and stuff like that. That's signal processing, and that's where we get into the reverb, which is the resonance of a room, echo, where it kind of bounces back at you, and then delay, which would delay the thing. We're going to play around with different effects. But digital mixers, again, it's all on board. It's all in the software. Let's talk a little bit about feedback, because that kind of goes hand in hand with EQ. Feedback, I'm sure we've all heard it at one time or another. Feedback is that howling, screeching, ringing sound. It can be piercing and loud. And what it is it's when you have a microphone too close to a speaker, and the speaker picks up, or the microphone picks up a sound that the speaker's making, and it reproduces it, and it keeps re-amplifying it. So the sound goes into the microphone, comes out the speaker, the microphone picks it up from the speaker, goes back into the microphone. It creates this loop, and it manifests as a howling, a screeching, a ringing sound. And it can be bad. It can damage your equipment. If it gets too loud, it goes out of control, because it typically gets louder and louder and louder. You can eliminate that by doing the EQ stuff. So on your mixer, you'll typically have what's called a parametric EQ. And up at the top, I just drew all over that. Let's erase all the ink on the slide. There we go. You can see, just barely, you got 1.5K, 4K, and 10K. So this knob, you're going to select, like let's say we want to roll off some 4K. We got some ring in at 4K. We're going to turn this knob to 4K, and then we're going to come down to this guy. In the middle is 0. So it's not boosting or cutting, but right here it's actually turned all the way to the left. So that's pulling 15 dB out of that 4K, because we're selecting that particular frequency to cut. Same thing down here, except now we're dealing with 200, 500, 1000, and 2000, and then up to 5000. So it's a different range. This one goes from 800 to 20 kilohertz. This one goes from 200 hertz, so a little bit lower, and it kind of overlaps at 5 kilohertz right there. And again, you got boost cut. Down here on the bottom, same thing, except now we're down to 20 hertz on the bottom, and we only get up to 500 hertz. So you have 3 parametric EQs that you can kind of adjust and do it. So let's say we have feedback constantly at 1000 hertz. So we'd set this guy to 1000, and then we turn this guy down. That would kill the feedback. On the GLD, this is done a couple ways. You have knobs, and to the left of this screen, there are knobs that you can adjust, just like what I just said. But this is also a touch screen, so you can actually like tap and drag down this little 200 here. So there's a notch, a cut at 200, and then a cut at 2K. And then we have a flat raise. I forget what these are called. Shelf filters. Kind of rolling in at 10K. So that just raises it up, and you can see the line here. So this is actually where the frequencies are kind of cutted, and it's graphically represented. My phone's like doing something, but I don't know where it went. Oh well, we'll keep going. Cables and connectors. What do we got here? So cables and connectors. Let me get my train of thought back on here. There are two different types of cables, I guess you could say, that we send to the mixer. So this is pre-mixer right now. There's unbalanced and balanced. And the easiest way to describe the difference between the two is unbalanced is going to use 2 wires to transmit the signal, and balanced is going to use 3. So if you're ever like, I don't know if this is balanced or unbalanced, if it's only got 2 things to connect it, it's definitely going to be an unbalanced. So look at this guy right here. Where'd my pen go? There it is. This is a TS, or a tip sleeve connector. You've seen it. Your phones used to have something like this where you could plug in your headphones, but now you got the AirPods and all that jazz, which I just realized I had little earbuds I left at home. Sad day. But yeah, you have a tip and a sleeve. So you only have two connectors, and any type of electrical connection is going to need a signal, and it's going to need a ground. So you have a plus and a minus. Sometimes you'll see it little lines like this, and that means ground. But that's great. You just need the signal and you need the ground for electricity to be happy. So guitar cables are going to deal with this. Guitars, electric guitars, basses, stuff like that are always going to be unbalanced. They're great for short runs, but if you have a really long one, and let's say it runs by like some fluorescent lights or a microwave or your phone, it's going to pick up all kinds of noise. If you've ever been near a speaker and a phone started doing something and it goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, that's the digital interference from the phone, the radio in the phone, causing interference inside the electric circuitry for the audio. So the really smart people that invented all this stuff said, well, hey, if we take 3 wires and we take one of these wires and we take the little waveform like over here and we like flip it upside down, it like gets rid of that interference. And it does. It actually works really well. It's called common mode rejection. And what that essentially does is it gives resistance to any sort of electromagnetic interference that your cable may run by. So mic cables, if you notice down here, have 3 pins. So you have 1 pin for the signal, 1 pin for the signal that's inverted, and then there's your ground. So, and you can see here, you can have your XLR, which is what that mic cable is called, has 3 pins, and you can even have something like the tip sleeve, but we add a ring. So we add this little guy in the middle, and now we have three things to connect. So unbalanced 2, balanced is 3. Balanced is good for long, unbalanced is good for short. So let's say we got an unbalanced guitar on stage and we want to make it balanced to send it up to the mixer. Well, that's where the DI comes in. A DI is going to take that unbalanced, and you can see there's like a little gizmo right here. That's the mic unbalanced. And it's going to convert it to a balanced signal. Wait a minute, that one's weird. I'm sorry, you're going to plug it into this one. This DI is kind of weird. I don't really like it. But it has a way to plug in. You can plug in an unbalanced XLR, I guess. But anyways, you're typically going to have something that looks like this. We'll X that out for right now. And you have your tip sleeve connector. And then on the back, it'll have an XLR. Let me see if I can draw this with the mouse. Oh, he looks pretty good. I'll make him angry. The XLR. So it has circuitry inside here, which takes that signal, which is bebopping along right there, and it will add an upside down version of the signal and send it onto the mixer. So typically you're going to see a DI on stage plugged into a guitar and then a mic cable on the back go into the mixer. Some DIs are passive, meaning that you just plug them in and go, and they don't need anything from you. And then some have batteries and some run on phantom power like the condenser mics do. So it just depends. Different types of cables, connectors you're going to have to deal with. We've got the XLR up here, which is, typically little 3 things. You can have XLRs with 5 pins, and you'll see them sometimes in here because it's DMX, or lighting runs on it, which is super cool. The other type we just talked about is your tip sleeve or tip ring sleeve, TS or TRS. It is also known, the big one is known as a 1/4 inch or a phono cable. Phono, I want to say it came from like the telephones. Like back in ancient times when you called someone, you had to connect to like an office and a lady would plug you in to the other dude. There wasn't computers that could do that. And they used the tip sleeve and tip ring sleeve in order to do that. So I think that's where the phono came from, but again, phono is Greek Latin for sound, so it could just be that too. Banana plugs are these guys. Don't know why they're called banana plugs. I guess this kind of looks like a banana, if you really want to go that route. But banana plugs are used for speaker wiring. We use those in our speaker patch bay. And every banana plug will have a little bump on the side that looks like a minus sign. And that means this is the negative one, so that's your ground. And then this guy will be your hot, your signal. So it's always important when you're plugging in the speakers. Typically your positive is going to be red and your negative is going to be black. So you have to be sure you're plugging it in the right way because it could mess up the speakers otherwise or just not work. The other type of speaker connector we deal with is the speak-on. So we got XLR, we got tip ring sleeve, tip sleeve, we got banana, and we got speak-on. Speak-ons look like this. They're cool. They have like a little circle thing, and they plug in and twist. Again, speaker wiring. All of our outputs are speak-ons. There's a little tab on it, and when you plug these things in, you have to plug it into the little port, and then you have to twist it till that tab goes click. If you don't twist it, it doesn't work. That's important. Okay, moving on. Troubleshooting. So let's say we plugged in a microphone on stage. Hooray. Soundboard guy is like unmuting it and there's no signal at the board. And he's like, "Hey man, there's no signal down there. What are you doing? What are you doing with your life right now?" So, what do? I'm asking you like I'm expecting an answer. You have to check where in the signal chain there's a problem. So down here we have the microphone and we have a little cable that goes to the wall plate. So just here, I see four things really that could be wrong. It could be plugged into the wrong port here. The cable could be bad. A little rat could have chewed on it. This is a rat. That's a pretty good rat. I mean, a little nose. There we go. So the rat chewed on it. It could be plugged in wrong here, or the mic could be bad. The mic could be busted. So what do you test first? You're typically going to troubleshoot the signal chain. So let's assume everything's working. Let's assume that all the gear we tested, we've used it last week, it was fine. And we'll just verify that, yes, the mic is plugged in. Yes, the mic is in the right port. Now, up here, let's make sure that we're plugged into the right wall plate, and then the wall plate is plugged into the right port on the mixer. And then, if everything works correctly, then your next step is to start try a different mic. Okay, that didn't work. Try a different cable. That didn't work. Come up here, try a different cable up in the rack. Oh, that worked. It was a bad rack cable, and then we would take that cable out of service. Troubleshooting, you're going to isolate the system into its smallest components and just try and swap one thing at a time until it fixes it. So troubleshooting number 2, you plugged in a monitor on stage to a speak-on port. The sound op cannot get audio to the speaker. What do? Again, we're going to check every connection, make sure that we're in the right numbers from the patch bay to the different things like that. And then with the speakers, we want to double check the mixer configuration and make sure we're actually routing it correctly. With monitor speakers, we use something called aux outs, AUX outs, auxiliary outs. So you have to make sure that the signal you want to send to that speaker is actually being sent, otherwise it won't work. Troubleshooting number 3, you are trying to play back audio from a computer hooked up in the booth. Signal is appearing on the board, but you can't hear anything from the speakers when you unmute or turn up the fader. What do? Okay, so this one has a little red herring in it. Or I don't even know if it's a red herring, but it's an important fact. It's appearing on the board. So what does that tell us? That tells us that A, the laptop is okay. It's outputting signal to the mixer, which is also okay. So the problem can be here, here, or here. So we're going to double check that, make sure it's unmuted. It could be muted on there. Make sure the mains are unmuted. And then if the mains, and the mixer, there's a way to check and see if you're getting signal to the main output. It'll have a meter that will tell you that. So if you're good there, you can write off the mixer as being the problem. So from there, we're going to check the patching to the amp, check the amp, maybe the amp didn't get turned on, and then check the patching to the speaker. So you kind of work from your most logical likely failures, which is a configuration error, and that we didn't route it correctly, or it's muted or something silly like that. And then we work to our least likely things. Like, it's not likely that a speaker will just die and stop working, but it's kind of sort of likely that an amp blows up. We had that happen a couple years ago. One of our amps just like died. We turned it on, it went boom, and that was that. So you just, you just deal with it. Like, you troubleshoot. Video broadcast. This is new. This is brand spanking new. This year, is the whole COVID thing, which is super fun. But one of the things that we kind of hit the gas on was adding the ability to live stream, because everything that happens in here now, has to go on the internet. So what is video broadcast? Video broadcast is where we take video, combine it with audio, and then we stream it to a server that operates and sends it to everybody. So YouTube is just a series of servers that has a front end, a thing that you look at and can watch and do stuff. But we can send our video and audio stream to YouTube, and then they can help us distribute it to our audiences. It does require like a video source, so you have to have something you can stream out. So cameras, computers that are going to reproduce video or images or media. And then it does require a computer or a device to basically generate that stream, to composite the different things into one coherent format that can then be sent to the server. So we're going to talk about streaming topology. This is a very basic stream setup. If you guys watch Twitch or YouTube or any of those guys, they're going to have essentially some kind of setup like this. They'll have a sort of like a webcam or a video camera that they hook up, a microphone so you can hear them talk, and they usually have some kind of headphones so they can hear themselves. And this all interfaces into the computer. And then in the computer, there'll be software that will talk to YouTube. And YouTube, and like pretty much everybody, uses a concept called a stream key. Basically, like, there's a billion people streaming right now. I'm streaming right now. I don't know if I'm still streaming. Let me make sure. I haven't checked that in a while. Yeah, I'm still streaming. That's good. So essentially, you've got a billion people streaming at once. How does YouTube say, like, oh, that's Ed streaming versus, Joey down the block? Well, there's a stream key. So YouTube generates these stream keys, which are randomized series of numbers and letters that identify you uniquely. So it's like a pre-shared agreement that, like, oh, okay, your stream key is like W2, and then this guy's stream key is X4. They're a lot longer than that, but that's how it differentiates. So once we get all this set up, punch in the stream keys, start streaming, sending, basically just talking to the server at YouTube, then it goes from there. A more advanced streaming setup, you're going to separate your audio and your video into two different systems. So you'll have a mixer dedicated to the audio, and then a mixer, or more likely it's called a switcher, is going to control your cameras and combine that into a feed. And then you may have a hardware encoder. On some devices, this is all one device, like the audio, video, and hardware encoder are set up together. And sometimes you don't even need the computer. Like the hardware encoder may talk to YouTube and do that whole thing. That's like our system. So this is kind of a layout of what we've got right now. We have 4 cameras that we use. I just bought a camera that's on the bridge hanging under there for our backstage feed because the old one died. Last year I did buy a DSLR, which is it's a point and shoot kind of camera that you can change the lenses out, but it has a good sensor and it can work for video as well. And then I have an old Sony 30x zoom handycam that outputs HDMI. So we've been using that as well, and combined with the other 2 cameras. And then I've got a laptop up in the booth. Now, the bridge cam and the booth laptop, I have so they can split out, because the booth laptop, we also need to talk to the projector. So I have a splitter for that guy. And then the bridge cam, I have a splitter that goes to what's called an HD RF modulator, which basically is, it makes its own TV station. And then that goes to the backstage monitors. So you guys, when you're doing shows, you can see backstage or in the wings or whatever. Now, on the soundboard, our GLD, I have an aux set up that goes right to a little mixer that's upstairs, and then the output of that mixer goes into a device called the ATEM Mini Pro Switcher. And what that guy is it takes all the 4 video feeds, it takes the audio feed coming in from the GLD, and it combines them, it composites them together, and then it can stream directly to YouTube. It can also record, it can also output like a video to, you know, another computer. I used to use a little Mac Mini. Let's see, there's Mac. Wow, okay. I used to send it to the Mac Mini and then use OBS to send it to YouTube, but that didn't work so well. This actually does a better job of streaming on its own. So I've kind of just gone to that as the way of doing things. So streaming, to do stream, you have to point your hardware at the server, like YouTube, Twitch, whatever. Each streaming website does the stream key like I talked about. You want to keep that key private, because if you publish your stream key by accident, anybody with the stream key is going to be able to stream as you. It doesn't, that's the security, that's the authentication. So it's important to keep that private. You start the stream and you're off to the races. So let's talk about using the camera. We have a Canon DSLR. It's an EOS SL3 Rebel, which is their cheapest camera that can do what they call clean HDMI out, which just sends an HDMI signal without like an overlay of info on the screen. So it works pretty good. And if we want to upgrade the lenses, we have the ability to do that. So I'm pretty happy. But on the camera, there's a lot of these rings. The first one down here at the bottom by the lens is the focus ring. So if you turn this guy one way or the other, it's going to focus the camera. There's another bigger ring below that, and that's the zoom. So the zoom will zoom. It makes it look like you're getting closer or further away from whatever it is, but it's just moving glass inside there to zoom in the view. And then down here on the bottom, there's image stabilization, which we usually keep off unless we're doing something where we're moving around, because these are usually tripod mounted, so you don't need the stabilizer. And then the auto manual focus. Usually, if I'm doing a static shot, I will let it autofocus and then I'll turn that off, because you don't want it trying to focus on stuff while you're streaming. It looks kind of funky. There's 3 ways that we can move the camera, and the one is pan. So pan is left to right. So if you're looking like left or panning right, but not moving up or down. Tilt is up and down. So pan tilt. Between those two, you can kind of get almost 360 degrees of movement or whatever. And then zoom. Zoom is, again, you're adjusting the zoom to kind of tighten the shot or open up the shot. Speaking of the shot, there's different ways we frame up a shot. When we're talking about a wide shot, we're going to pull back and get as much of the subject in their environment as possible. Subject in this case is this dude standing here. A medium shot is going to kind of focus in on the subject, but maybe not the whole subject. Maybe it's like halfway up their torso and just their head, but it still captures some of the backgrounds. And then a close shot or a tight shot is we're really just looking at their face. This is the different things that you're going to see here. Like right now, it's kind of a close shot, but you can see my expression, my face, how I'm looking, whatever. The medium and the close shot, you're going to capture more of that than you would on a wide shot, just because as you pull back, you know, it's harder to see expression. So let's talk a little bit about like color and light and how cameras work differently than your eyes. Your eyes are really good at doing exposure and white balance. It handles like how much light goes into your eye and hits your retina with your iris. Cameras have irises too, so exposure kind of is how much light is let into the camera and on the sensor. And that picture up here, when you decrease the exposure, the image gets darker. And when you increase it, it gets lighter. So you want to set your exposure so it looks like naturally, but you can see everything. Cameras are not as good at your eyes as differentiating between light and dark. And you can see, like, even as I'm moving around, my camera's kind of trying desperately to keep the exposure good. So some cameras have automatic exposure, some don't. Both of our cameras are a little different in how they handle exposure just because they're different cameras. White balance is basically how the camera decides what's white. So if I hold up, I've got a mask here. This is white, right? It looks white, but it may not be white. Sometimes white is a little more blue, like in the case of where it says tungsten down here, or daylight, where it goes a little bit more kind of orangey-ish. Stage lights are tungsten lights. Your house lights are usually, well, they used to be tungsten. They're probably LED by now. But tungsten light is pretty orange on the spectrum of things. So to compensate, the camera will turn things blue to kind of balance it back to a neutral white. Cameras do this automatically most of the time. And then sometimes you can set them manually, like how you want to white balance it. When we're lighting for video, because we're a theater, we primarily do theater lighting, which is great for in-person, being there, seeing it, whatever. But video does take a little bit more consideration in when you're dealing about how to light stuff. The classic lighting setup for video is the three-point lighting, which you can see there's a picture of a lady sitting in the middle here, and we've got a light here, a light here, and a light here. So the key light is going to be your brightest light source, whatever's pointing at the subject, illuminating them so we can see. But without additional lighting, that's going to be kind of dramatic and, I don't know, I have a light here. Let's see if we can kind of do this. So like if I had just this source, let's get creative. So if I just had a single light source on me, it's pretty washed out. Let me see if I can, there we go. I'm holding a flashlight trying to do this. So you can see like half of my face isn't illuminated, just simply because it's only coming from the one source. But I've got my phone here. So let's do a little bit from the side. We'll see if we can kind of balance this out. Yeah, it's kind of getting there. Again, this is a flashlight, so it's not great. And this is my phone. So yeah, I'm moving them around. You can kind of see how it's changing. We're getting kind of an angle there. I'm going to turn the big light back on. Okay. So filling key light, usually you're going to come from different angles at the subject just to kind of fill in the shadows. And then the backlight is important because it defines the subject from the background. So usually it lights the hair, the tops of the shoulders, and it helps you see the background differently than the subject. Because the cameras aren't really, your eyes are pretty good at differentiating the two in real life, but on camera it doesn't always transmit super well. But the theater lighting plot, when we get into lighting, you'll learn a little bit about that. I have an example. This is Miss Giz. We did a shoot for the guidance department, and the one on the left is from last year, and then the one on the right is from this year. And I want you to notice a couple key differences. In this one on the top, I did not have, I don't think I had any downlight, and I didn't have any backlight going on. So her hair disappears into the black curtain, okay? You can see we only had one light source kind of coming from here, so this side of her face is completely dark, which is an effect, like maybe we were going for that, I don't know. We set this up in a hurry. This year, when we did the video, I had downlight coming down, so you can see if you look along her hairline, it's really easy to define against the background. The shoulders are lit. It looks very easy to see her against the back of the curtain. She's not disappearing into any of that. The other trick I did was I actually lit the curtain. So the curtain itself had light on it, which helps kind of differentiate. It was a different color. And then for her face light, we had two lights kind of pointing down up from up top. The only complaint I had about this video shoot is we ended up with a little bit of a shadow under everyone's chin. So if we were going to go do this again, I would probably add some like soft fill light from like a low angle just to illuminate a little bit of those shadows so they're not quite as stark in contrast. But you can see the difference here, and the quality. This was shot with the same camera from last year to this year, and the only difference in these two shots is that I added some more light in some different spots. So the downlight, the backlight made a huge difference there, and if we added a little bit more fill lighting to the key light, we probably would be in pretty good shape. Oops, wrong button. So last slide, last little bit we're going to talk about is audio for video. When you're mixing audio into the video stream, you got to pull a separate mix. You can't just duplicate whatever's coming out of your main speakers, because those rely on the fact that it's going into the house, it's going to echo around, it's going to sound good for that. But almost always when you pull from that, you're going to have a bad mix, just simply because when you're recording something, it's opposite of what goes into the house for live. So anything loud on stage is going to be really quiet in the recording, versus the stuff that is quiet on stage is going to be blown out and loud. So I usually pull an aux mix for recording. I'll usually throw in a little bit of an ambient mic, just a mic that's mounted up in the house somewhere to pick up the stream and kind of reproduce that, or pick up just the house noise, like audience noise. It makes it sound more natural than a mic that's just like really close, right up where someone's talking. But you do need that close mic as well to differentiate and broadcast the actual sound. So you kind of mix them together and you get a good sound with that. And I think that's it. So that's the whole schmoigel. That's everything that we're talking about. You guys can check this out at your leisure. Those of you that are queued or at home or whatever, this is everything for sound video, and will help you guys hopefully in studying for the test. So with that said, thanks for watching. Stagecraft Morning News, the 1, 2, turn 2, as they say. Smash that like button. Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications, and I will see you guys in class.